Today you are being vested with the responsibilities and privileges that come with the position of President of Grace University. And you are also being entrusted with the stewardship of this great institution. Through the authority I've been given as Chairman of the Board of Trustees, I formally install you as the 11th President of Grace University and place the administration of Grace University in your capable hands.
Since the Middle Ages, it has been traditional for the college and university presidents to wear a medallion at all ceremonial events to symbolize the authority of the office of president. The Grace University Presidential Medallion is the university seal, which you see on the slide in back of me, die cast in gold bearing the words, "Distinctly Biblical." Dr. Barnes, as you accept this charge of this office, my prayer is for you to stay focused on God's will and to continue to follow His direction as you distinguish yourself and this university from all others.
I know how Thad felt when he came up and said, I guess I'll just pinch hit, because how do you follow that rendition of Holy Ground? And how do you follow the singing of the Great I Am and all that represents? So I'll probably just stick to my script as much as I can. Now, I'd like to start with a comment on this medallion, because when we moved to Omaha, we finally got the boys here because they were spending some time with my mother and father as we were trying to get things settled. They're looking around the office and wondering what's in the drawers and what's in the cabinets. Lucas found this medallion and said, "Dad, can I have that?" And then the other day, it brought me back to a memory when I was preaching at a small African-American church in Louisville, Kentucky, and the pastor, you would have thought that Billy Graham was coming up to speak because of the introduction this man gave. And I'm looking at my father, and he's just kind of shaking his head. And the other day, Isabel says, "Dad, what do you think about," well, we call him Grandy, "what do you think about your son being the 11th president of Grace University?" And he simply said, "It's unbelievable." Now, there might have been another meaning intended by the way he said that, but I'm sure there was some accuracy in the way he said it too. And some of you have heard this story maybe too many times, but I love to tell it, so I'm going to throw it in one more time. When I was just, I don't know, maybe 1 year old, I certainly don't remember this, I've just heard the stories. But both my parents worked, and my great-grandmother, our granny, who was born in 1900, took care of us. And my mom called to see how we were doing. I have a sister named Donna. And my granny said, "Well, they're doing good. I don't know if David's going to be a preacher or an outlaw. He's got a Bible on one hand and he's got a pistol in the other." And so I stand before you today just humbled and grateful to be called the 11th president of Grace University. Chairman Whaley, board members, faculty, staff, students, colleagues, family, and friends. Following God's call and acceptance of the invitation to serve as Grace University's 11th president, and in recognition of God's faithfulness to His children and His purposes, I accept this charge. Before school began, in a meeting with student leaders, a student asked me what the first change was that I planned to bring to Grace University. Certainly a loaded question. I think, asked innocently enough. Influenced perhaps by experience and the guiding of the Holy Spirit, I responded in an honest way that I know Brent Garrison would understand from our service together at Southwestern College. I responded that my intent is not to change Grace University, but rather to bring what God has given me to add to what He is already doing here. In this inauguration ceremony, I say to you, with my acceptance of this charge, and to the best of my ability, I bring the talents and gifts God has bestowed upon me to add what He is doing here at Grace University. It doesn't hurt to reference the mission statement yet again. Grace University exists to develop servant leaders for the home, the church, and the world through excellence in biblically integrated education and through life change in a personal discipling environment, all for the glory of God. In The Story of Grace, a book written about the first 35 years of Grace's existence, Paul Kuhlman wrote, "In the beginning, God." These words, he said, also describe the origin of Grace College of the Bible. Before 1943, only the infinite mind of God could foresee the establishment of such an institution. As yet, there were no buildings, no students, no faculty, not even the name, Grace Bible Institute. But God was moving among the minds of men as of old. His Spirit had moved upon the waters, into the heart of many a parent, many a pastor, many a young person hungry for a closer walk with the Lord. God's Spirit was implanting a desire, a prayer that would grow and blossom to make the new institution a reality. It was God then who was the true cause and who in His own time launched Grace College of the Bible into existence. Building on the faithfulness of God's servants of grace over the past 69 years, most recently the faithful tenure of Dr. Jim Ekman and those serving with him, I stand before you today humbled and honored to be called as the 11th president of Grace University. God is alive and well and is moving in the hearts and minds of His people for His purposes at Grace University, and I believe we have an incredibly exciting future. Not because of David Barnes or any individual, but because of what God has called us to do. And it's when I look and continue to learn of the things that I encounter that represent God's work over time in ways that I could not understand, I simply have to say to God, thank you. And when I look at Dr. Ekman and the opportunity availed to Grace University, yes, it says something about him, and perhaps it says something about me, but it says a whole lot about Grace University when he introduces me to a donor that he has already prepared the way with months and years of prayer and months of conversation, and we walk into the room in our respective roles. How powerful is that for Grace University? Building on the foundation of 69 years of faithfulness, we are in the beginning stages of bringing our best on what I have recently been calling the multiple railroad tracks that represent the various distinctly biblical education programs of Grace University. And those are the traditional undergraduate program, the adult degree completion program we call Excel, graduate programs, and online. Because of the faithfulness and because of talented servants who are already in existence and a faithful board of trustees and incredible leadership over the course of time, I believe we are at a point where there's an opportunity for God to bring the rain for faithful seeds that have been planted and nurtured for many, many years for Grace University to go to the next level that God intends for it. Some of these things on the traditional undergraduate level that are going to provide opportunities for students that need what Grace has to offer are going to be things like the expansion of athletic programs. For it's an interesting dynamic that a baseball player, for example, just to choose one sport, he might want to come to Grace University, but he's not going to come if he really wants to play baseball. Unfortunately, there are other biblically distinctive schools out there that this player can go to, but there's not one that's regionally accredited and ABHE accredited in this part of the country. That's Grace University. And so we have opportunities to expand in that area. The faculty are already at work with innovative types of new programs, such as our not-for-profit leadership out of the business program, and I couldn't mention them all. In the graduate program, I inherited a process in which the institution was pursuing to add graduate programs in education. That is ongoing today and will lay additional foundation for other graduate programs to come that this faculty has already said, we need to step in this arena, for there are people who need what we have to offer. And online intertwines with all of those programs. I think a lot of what's going to happen, that's God is going to bless in the days ahead, is going to come out of simply what a business person might call communication and marketing. For there are many people who are aware of grace, not enough, mind you, but there are many people who are aware of grace that are unaware of the breadth of grace that I've already mentioned, with multiple undergraduate programs and graduate programs and adult degree completion programs and online opportunities. And so in the area of communication and marketing, we will strive to position the institution much more effectively in a crowded, confused marketplace where people in the world need what Grace has to provide. Recently, Grace University faculty member Dr. Gary Nebeker shared an article that introduced me to a term that encompasses the type of leadership I strive for. The term is traditioned innovation. This term suggests a continuous, healthy tension between institutional history and innovation to meet the needs of today. An ability to marry the unwavering commitment to institutional history and mission while embracing innovation to expand and meet the needs of our constituencies. The Chief Executive of the Association of Biblical Higher Education is here today. I've also received a letter from Sylvia Manning, who is the President of the Higher Learning Commission of the North Central Association of Colleges and Schools. I know these people in their positions of authority, where God has called them, most particularly in the ABHE arena, there is a battle going on in our world that leads to the urgency that we need to fill for stepping boldly into the future. Brent Garrison, while certainly not the author of the words in Luke 6:40, but I've heard him use these words many times, and I am so thankful to use them in my own right. That a student, when fully trained, becomes like his teacher. We had a session with pastors as part of our Inauguration Week festivities a few days ago, and I stepped into that. I would have been happy a month ago. I really didn't know what to expect, and I was anticipating maybe 15 to 25 pastors sitting around a table and enjoying our conversation and talking about the future of the school. I checked about a week in advance. We had 50, and then there were 60, and then there were 70, and we ended up with over 100 pastors in attendance at this event. Later that afternoon, we had over 80 in attendance at a community reception. Two things that I see as testimony to God already being at work. But one of the things I mentioned to these pastors And any of you, as my friend Sonny Hayes likes to say in his leadership at the Boy Scouts of America, I'm putting my counseling shingle up at 10, 2, and 4. Those of us in leadership are frequently counseling. And those of us in churches, when you're in a counseling situation, no matter what experience that person is going through, every single one stems from a twisted component of a worldview that has taken the course of time to develop and get people confused. An institution like Grace University and many others around the country, we are seeking to develop a biblical worldview in everyone who steps into our arena. It will not eliminate all those counseling opportunities, but it will certainly make them different and more effective and more godlike and transform our culture for the cause of Christ. We have an urgency to step forward boldly to provide exactly what Grace University offers, to get a biblical worldview in our graduates who then serve around the world. There are also financial factors and the governmental factors that influence accreditation bodies. All of these things lead to an urgency that we need to have. I want to just reference a few signs of what I see as God's faithfulness as we step into the future. Pastor Dennis, Kurt Hofer, and others referenced the search process. Thad Bosley did as well. God's hand was alive and well in that search process. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when Isabel and I finally reached the comfort level where we could say, yes, this is where God is leading us. And I'd like to tell you that the first person in my family that was ready to move to Nebraska was Noah. God was at work in his life, and I don't know if that's because he fancies himself a storm chaser or those kinds of things, but he was ready to move to Omaha. God was at work in his life. Isabel understood after a future meeting that she didn't know how she was going to say no to coming to serve with these people. I was intertwined so intimately with going back home, if you will, to an institution where I'd faithfully served before, and it was so hard to get to a point to even talk to the president to say, hey, I'm going for this follow-up interview and I need to let you know what's going on. I was terrified to do that. But God was at work in those conversations, which ultimately led to the blessing of, you know what, we might not understand everything about your departure, but we bless you as you move forward, and we understand that that's where you need to go. So I've seen God's hand at work in that. I've already referenced God's hand in the pastor's luncheon. I've referenced it a little bit in the readiness of our faculty and staff, and even in our students. The power of the presidential collaboration of Ekman and Barnes. And about last year, when the announcement came out that I was accepting the presidency of Grace University, I was in Israel. And some of the things that God was doing that week, there were two messages that kept coming to me. And one was, do not waver, move forward boldly. And the other one was one of multiplication. As we stood in Tagba, where the feeding of the 5,000 took place, and as I listened to the testimony of another colleague who was on this journey with me, talk about how that was representing a time where God was going to take what he had been through, the bit that he had to offer, and multiply it for his purposes. I see that. We are in a period of that at Grace University. And in closing, I'd just like to reiterate one more time that my objective is to bring everything that God has given me for his purposes at Grace University and we'll leave the results up to him. And as Brent and I have, he's taught me well in this regard, and I understand it, and I seek it myself. None of us are ever perfect at it because we're human beings, but we will give God the glory for the great things he will do. Thank you very much.